So, Bryan Crosby, I am in Midlothian, Virginia, which is a suburb of Richmond. I think I met Ray. It was either I think it was like a cold email, like or a cold message on LinkedIn or something along those lines. I'd have to actually look. But it's funny because I bet I've gotten dozens of those for franchise opportunity things in the past. And I think it was just at the time or something about that message that, I was like, all right, let's talk and see what that looks like. I think timing had a whole lot to do with it in that I ended up leaving an executive role back in April of 24 and was looking for something else. I was debating buying a business, I was debating starting a business, I was talking to recruiters about new roles, and my wife and I were talking about, do we relocate if I get a new executive role to somewhere else, and all those fun questions. And having been around, I've had an entrepreneurial itch since business school. So I thought it was worth exploring and see if I found something that felt like it resonated, basically. The way I approached it, I'm a data guy, I'm an analytics guy, I've run P&Ls for companies, things like that. And so I wanted to make sure it was something that was a fit. It needed to meet kind of my basic criteria for what made sense financially. So when I approached it, it's funny because I've had this conversation with a couple other friends who've thought about something like this, and I goes, well, what did you do? I mean, the fit was critical. It had to match skill sets where I felt like I could bring value. And then it also had to match from a financial performance, kind of assuming I did the right things, where should this end up? Because my ultimate goal was, how do we take ourselves to a different level financially? And to me, getting bigger roles and stuff will come, and that's a kind of a timeline thing more than anything else. But this is something where if we ramp it, it's an asset and it actually could grow. And my hope was reinvest and just continue to grow, buy up additional territories, additional building, do additional store locations, whatever the franchise was. I think I looked at least something like six or so businesses with Ray, if not more. A couple really resonated that I did pretty deep dives in. And I ended up, I think like one was like a med spa. I ended up bailing on that because I couldn't measure the cost with how low the return was. It was going to just take so much money and so much time to ramp up to being a reasonable level. And it was just not something in my wheelhouse. I didn't feel like I brought a ton of value. It was just more of an executive type function if I was owning that business. And I just found, and the one I ended up with was temporary wall systems. And that one really resonated for a number of reasons. One, worked in the equipment rental business for decades of my career. So more heavy equipment, forklifts, things of that nature. But again, a rental model, I can kind of get my head wrapped around the financial aspects of it pretty quick. And then the other piece was it deals predominantly with commercial construction, which my first jobs out of college were project management and commercial construction. So kind of two wheelhouse areas. And then I saw a lot of growth in it. I saw it was a niche business. It's not a pretty business. It's something that's different, but it also had a great capital structure. I mean, you got depreciable assets, you've got all these things that were great positives to me. So it pretty quickly resonated outside of, I laugh because Ray even warned me about like their sales guy not being great. And certainly the beginning was rough. Their sales guy was struggling. So I ended up getting moved to working with one of the more executives, and no issues after that. And kind of once I went through the timeline, it again really resonated. And it was just a matter of, all right, so how big do we go? Are we going after multiple states? Are we going to go? And so kind of working through the details from there and negotiating a few pieces here and there. Oh, a number of things. I've recommended Ray. I mean, I kind of finished my journey to a degree back in like February of this year. So I'm really early on, in my opinion, at least. But as of February, I've already recommended, I think, two or three people to talk to Ray since then. And I've reached out to Ray as well because, I mean, frankly speaking, I wanted to try to find other people that I could talk to continue to learn and grow and make this business better. But I mean, from Ray's perspective, he was a resource kind of from day one. I asked a lot of questions. I probably peppered him more than he was ready for at times. But it was also somebody good I could bounce ideas off of, like, what is normal in this? What have you seen people negotiate for? And because I mean, there's a lot of things I was trying to do that I was probably stepping out of the norm for some and trying to grab potentially more territories or even multiple states. At one point was what we were looking at. He also helped me kind of over some of the initial hurdles around like SBA loans, connecting me with different people who were helpful, who were reviewing the FDD and, looking at how to consultants that could help me with my SBA loan and just a number of different contacts that made the process certainly smoother than it would have been otherwise. I have a feeling I could have figured it out, but it would have been a lot more bumping around and trying to figure out really where am I going, and probably could have made more mistakes than I did. Not that I was mistake free, certainly throughout the process. I feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose a little bit, but that's partly by design for what I've taken on. And that was really honestly one of the bigger concerns I had kind of day one is I have three young kids, a wife who owns her own business. I'm still working a role full time and starting this business. So I knew time was going to be really one of my biggest constraints in the process. So I think managing that has been kind of a challenge to say the least. But I mean, to me, it's exciting. I've enjoyed the little wins so far. And for me, I came into it kind of with realistic expectations. When I talk to people, I didn't want to know how the best guy performed right out of the gate. I wanted to know kind of what was the range so I can understand how I'm performing. And then certainly want to connect with people who are at the top tier so I can figure out, okay, so what am I doing? What am I not doing that I could be doing to continue to improve? To me, it's celebrating the small wins, like finding my sales guy that I hired was a big win for me. You know, I interviewed probably 30 people, at least phone interviewed, and then a handful of in-persons. Winning our first job was a big deal. That was a few weeks ago, honestly. But I mean, that was also one where I had expectations that were realistic. I knew it could take 3 to 6 months for what we do because we're in a commercial construction type bidding process often. It could take 3 to 6 months before we actually bid a job, land a job, close a job. So that first win, it was great to get on the board. Getting my SBA closed, getting our inventory in, getting just starting to get the things that are clicking. So we're actually up and running at a true business. So all of that, to me, those are the little wins. I think my next big target is, all right, when do we get to true profitability? When are we going to get to needing another salesperson and growing more? When are we getting to being in a position now I can buy more territory or buy out some neighbors or any number of things. So it's the little wins looking towards the next step in growth. I think probably the biggest thing that I was able to, or that Ray brought to the table for me, outside of doing a great job kind of helping narrow down to companies that likely were a fit. The questions he asked to kind of start the process really nailed down to companies that, for a number of reasons, might be a fit. And it took a couple rounds, and we did finally ultimately find a company that I thought was a really good fit. But again, the resource throughout the process of being a sounding board enabled me to ask questions and kind of understand what's the normal. I think you've got guys who are pretty highly successful in the franchise world who maybe have two or three franchises, or they've got 10 locations, or they're in their second multi-location franchise, or any number of things. And for them, reviewing an FDD or negotiating their next term sheets or whatever the pieces are is probably status quo, but for somebody doing it for the first time, it is a bit scary. I mean, I like to think I'm a reasonably bright guy, like decent background and MBA, all that fun stuff, but it's still scary. And for me, it was a pretty healthy investment. I mean, if you're spending that kind of money, you want to make sure you're doing all your diligence you can. And Ray was certainly helpful in providing either answers or resources for answers in the process. So, and obviously, like I said, I've already recommended him to two or three other guys who've talked to him probably since then. So certainly more than willing to recommend.
Perfect. That's all I got, unless you got any questions or anything else you want to add or
No, I mean, I'm good. Like I said, I appreciate the efforts and certainly no issues on my side. I think if I had to think back on like the issues we got a slow start, but I think it's because like one of his emails fell into my spam or promotion folder in my inbox or something like that. Ultimately, we landed in the right place, it seems like, and pretty smooth journey since then.